Have you ever sat through a presentation and thought, what was the point of that? Odds are there wasn't one. Just a swirl of slides, vague themes, wandering words, all style and no substance. And yet, making a clear, compelling point isn't just possible, it's essential. Let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk because today we're going to tackle the root cause of rambling talks and forgettable pitches, and more importantly, how to fix them. Because once you understand how to build and champion a true point, your message doesn't just land, it sticks.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jollis.
Today's guest, Joel Schwartzberg, is a workplace communication coach, author, and speechwriter who helps professionals and teams identify, sharpen, and champion their most essential points. A former editorial executive with Nickelodeon, Time, and PBS, Joel contributes to Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, and Inc. The second edition of his best-selling book, Get to the Point, Simply Sharpen and Sell Your Message, was released on June 17th. Happy to have you with us, and welcome to the show, Joel.
Thank you so much, Rob. Happy to be here and to talk to your audience.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here, so let's dive right in with that book. And the fact that you've got a second edition actually makes authors like me a little jealous. I wish all my books would go into multiple editions, but they get there because they sell well. What prompted the second edition for you?
One of the biggest things that made me realize I needed a new second edition was through the feedback I got from my workshops. You know, at the end of my communication workshops, I always say that this is the best workshop I've ever done because you have the benefit of all the learning and all the feedback from the 10 years of workshops I did before this. The only workshop that'll be better than this is the next one because it'll have the benefit of what I learned here. And those learnings came after the original publish of Get to the Point. So I wanted to take those ideas about AI, a brand new exercise that I use to help people get to the point. And even the cover, the original cover of Get to the Point had a very sharp pencil. And I thought, fantastic, what a visual metaphor for Get to the Point. Well, you know what's a better indicator of Get to the Point than a sharp pencil? The words get to the point. And if you see the new edition, we decided to make those words as big as possible because nothing better told people that the point of this book is helping people get to the point than those 5 words.
Yeah.
4 words, actually.
Yeah. And I'm going to get into that AI piece for it because I really want to talk about that. But I'll swap a story back with you. When I begged my publisher, it was John Wiley and Sons, to let me do a second edition of a presentation skills book. I did. And one of the reasons why, Joel, was because on the cover, 1993 cover now, was a beautiful picture of an overhead projector. Okay? So I was pinned in by some really old AV that went out pretty quickly. And I learned my lesson about, okay, unless I want to do a new edition every year, I have to take certain technology pieces and be a little more vague with them about, let's make sure they're visual, let's make sure we can see, right. But don't call out a manufacturer or a model number or I'm dead in the water before that thing even hits the shelves.
Right, a fax machine. Yeah, I could see covers becoming obsolete quickly.
Right. And the sad part is that you could have 80,000 words in a book and 200 of them kind of relate to something that's old. And it immediately ages the book to some readers. They'll put it down and go, "Why would I want to read this?" Well, most of it is still really good, but it's why we do like to update them. And the fact that you do workshops, what great feedback you're getting from the material you're delivering.
Right. Because, you and I are in the business of not just saying what we know, but responding to needs. And those needs evolve and change. They change as the culture evolves. They change as the technology evolves. They change as the challenges in the workplace evolve. So it's really incumbent on us to be responsive in that way.
You're right. And, let's get to the point here. You write about a point. Let's start with what, in your view, what is a point? And then how has that concept evolved since 2017?
Right. The most important thing is that what people think is their point is often not their point. And that's something that hasn't changed and something I encounter to this very day. Now, what is a point? A point is a proposition. You're basically saying that if we do X, Y, the letter Y, will result. You're making a suggestion, a recommendation. But often what people are doing instead is they're proposing ideas, topics, themes, catchphrases, definitions, descriptions, notions, observations. And if I hit you with an observation in a conference, you would come away thinking, all right, there was an interesting thought there. And maybe I remember Rob or Joel, but I'm not sure what I was supposed to take away, how I was activated, why this is relevant to me. Those things are important. And that's why working with a point, using the exercises I developed in the book to develop and sharpen a point, are so important. And let's use an example. Let's talk about podcasting.
Okay.
So if I told you, if you asked me, Joel, what do you want to talk about today? Yeah, I'm going to talk about podcasting. What have I told you? Is podcasting more popular or less popular? Is it a proven method or an unproven method? Are there ways of doing podcasting that are better than other ways? That's what I mean by if I give you a theme or a topic, you have nothing to sink your teeth into. What did Joel speak about? He talked about podcasting. But if I said I'm going to show you how podcasting is an effective way to reach your target millennial audience, now you go, oh,
Yeah.
now I have something that I could take away, apply, and use. And that is the difference between conveying a point and conveying a topic.
Outstanding. I am so glad you're talking about this. I think it's one of the biggest mistakes that presenters, authors, professional speakers make. And I'm going to use different language. A lot of times they misuse the word objective. So
Mhm.
they'll say, now the objective of this talk about podcasting is you're going to have a greater appreciation for the world of podcasting. Joel, I don't know how to measure that. I don't know what that exactly means.
Right,
So it's very vague. But what I think you're describing, which I like, is the big picture. Give me the big picture of what we're going to learn. It even
right,
helps me sometimes if I know what the big picture is. As an audience member, I'll have a better idea when I'm lost, when I'm not following you, because I'm saying, wait a minute, that doesn't line up with what Joel just said 5 minutes ago. But if you give me this vague, you're going to feel better about and have a greater understanding and appreciation. How do I know whether I'm lost or not?
right. And your measure of appreciation may be different from other people's measure of appreciation.
Right.
Now, with the book, I wanted to go further. We get to this point. All right, I can sense the difference between a point and a topic, but I wanted a test that a fourth grader could use, like a green light, red light test. One of them in the first edition was called the I believe that test. Basically, you put the words I believe that in front of your point, and if you have a complete sentence, then you're on your way to making a point.
Hmm.
So if you said, I believe that podcasting, not a complete sentence. I believe that the power of podcasting, not a complete sentence. I believe that podcasting will help us reach our millennial audience. That's a complete sentence. But in the new version, I have a brand new test, which I introduced to my workshops. And it's even more effective to some people. It's called the XY test. And it basically looks at the elements of a point in an equation. If we do X, Y will result. You need both the X and the Y. Going to the podcasting example, if X is the means and Y is the impact, only having an X sounds like this. You know what? We should have a podcast. Yeah, that sounds neat, but why? What'll it do for us? So you have the means, but not the impact. Now, a Y without an X and impact without a means sounds like this. You know what? I really think we should target our millennial audience. Great idea. How? So you're not seeing the mechanism. So if you want to really audit your points to make sure they are, make sure you have the X, the unique means to achieve your impact, and Y, the specific articulation of that impact.
Yeah, well said. I also like what you're talking about, not just from an audience standpoint, but from an instructor standpoint. Because
Mhm.
not only does it keep us contained, because we can wander a little bit, but as I said, I always like to know whether I've met my objective, whether, how did I do today? If my point is vague up front, well, how do I measure it at the end? You know?
Right.
So I
Exactly.
think you're not only taking care of the audience with what you're saying, Joel, you're taking care of the instructor as well.
Absolutely. And in fact, I'm glad you brought that up, Rob, because when people ask me, how do I measure
Mm,
the impact of what I say? If you take the topic approach, you would go to someone later in your audience or a colleague and say, how did I do? And they're going to say, you did great, or, you did all right. Useless, right?
right.
But if you understand that your goal was to deliver the point, and that was priority one, not convince people I'm a great public speaker, but deliver my point, then you know the question to ask is, what do you think my point was? Can you repeat it back to me? Or
Right.
this was my big point, my big takeaway. Did you receive that? And you talked a moment ago, Rob, about different words we use. I'm using the word point now because I find it the most useful word. But in college, we called it a thesis. In
Mhm.
PR, we call it a key message. To my wife, who's a fourth grade language arts teacher, she calls it a so what. So we're actually used to the concept, but we've become so enamored with the idea of a topic, of a theme, of a notion, of executive thinking, thought leadership, that we've forgotten what it means to have a clear thesis, a sharp key message, and a meaningful point.
Yeah, I agree. Quick story back to, when I was teaching at Xerox and we would go 5 days in this train the trainer program, we were teaching them try to how to, get to that point, measure that point, make sure it's measurable, that point. At the end of the program, I tell the students because they would have to give presentations. We're going to walk out in the hallway, and the first question I'm going to ask you is, were you able to meet your objective? Did you make your point? And I tell them, you can tell me yes, and I'll give you an A, mythically. You can tell me no, and I will still give you an A. But if you say I don't know, right? I don't know whether I met my meaning. We really never established it up front. We never had a measurement. We never measured it at the end. That's the one I'm trying to correct them from. Don't be concerned that you didn't meet it. Now if this is a workshop we're doing, I'm coming back after lunch. I'm going to have to redo a few pieces. All it did was give me a direction, or boy, they nailed that. I can keep moving. But we have to be able to answer the question.
Right. And to your point about objectives, sometimes I have clients and they say, what is your objective today? And they're about to give a big presentation next week. And they say, my objective is not to screw it up. Or my objective is to impress my boss with my public speaking ability.
Yeah,
And I have to say, and stop them right there and say, listen, newsflash, those are not your objectives. Uh, Screwing up or not screw up means you're in a competition that you're going to get a medal.
right,
Impressing your boss means you want your boss to put you up for more public speaking gigs.
right,
But usually, whether it's a CEO or a scientist or a student or a salesperson, their objective is to move this point, the value of this thing, whether it's a product or an idea, from here, your head, to their heads. And that's why what we're talking about, how can you measure the effect of a point on a person? Did they
right,
receive it? Why that's so valuable. And by the way, that reduces a lot of public speaking fear. When I see myself no longer being like a comedian or a fashion model or a singer where it's all about me, but in fact, a bicycle delivery person on the streets of New York City, and I've got to deliver this thing, my point, which I practice and I know from point A to point B, that seems like a simpler task and a less intimidating task than, oh, I got to get it in front of a spotlight and be really, really good.
yeah. And boy, you've hit on something. Let's stay there for a minute because you hit on something big. Look, if we're dealing with professional speakers and we've got some that are listening right now, that's fine. But we're dealing
Right.
with a lot of people who are trying to be as professional as they can. And how many times have you and I both had a nickel for every time somebody said, how do you get past those public speaking jitters? We'd have lots of nickels between the two of us. So there's more to it than a sentence or two, but let's nick it a little bit. Let's give me your best one or two thoughts about maybe a small tweak a speaker could make. And I guess we've just hit on one, but another small tweak a speaker can make to kind of bring down that anxiety level. I don't like the word nervous, but I'll use the word anxious. Okay.
Right. I'm gonna lead with the one that's most like a hack,
Uh,
and because it works, and you can Google this or AI it. It turns out in your brain, the area where you are holding a lot of nervous energy is very, very close to the area where you are holding a lot of excitement energy. In fact, the neurons that are at play there, and I'm trying not to speak like a neurobiologist, but they're so close that you can easily toggle from nervous energy to excited energy merely by doing this, saying the words, I'm excited, I'm excited, I'm excited. Even if you're nervous, and anxiety and anxious, your mere saying that before you begin will move you over from anxiety nervousness to excitement nervousness. And there's nothing more engaging than an excited presenter. And there's nothing more distancing than a very anxious presenter. So let's start with that little tip. But I've actually thought a lot about this very recently, Rob. And one of the ideas that I've come to is that that anxiety is actually your fight or flight response, uh, your your instinctual thought. And it's your thought saying, hey, you're about to enter a danger zone where you're in trouble, you're going to be anxious. Let's run. How can I make you run? I can make you run by voices saying, "Oh, this is not going to go well. You're a fraud. You're going to show nervousness. Please just get out of here." Now, that fight or flight instinct is not smart. It only recognizes anxiety. That's why you have to put that aside and work on the other side of your brain that knows, hey, all I need to do is take this idea and move it from my head to my audience's head. And if I do that, even if imperfectly, even with six ums, I succeed. But if I come away and Rob, you're in my audience and you think, oh, well, Joel was fantastic. He was a great public speaker. I can't wait to hear him again. He was funny. He was interesting. And someone asks you, well, what was Joel's point or how did he help people get to the point? I don't really know, but boy, was Joel really charismatic.
Mm.
That is an epic fail.
Right.
So if people just move out of that fight or flight thinking and move into this delivery thinking, then they can be less intimidating. And by the way, and I love to say this, we never say we perform a speech. We perform a presentation. What do we say? We deliver a speech. We
Right.
deliver a presentation. And in that word, we know what our job is. Delivery, not performance.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to think on that one a little bit because I think there's a performance element, but I do believe words are important. And I think maybe it's just I'm at a level now where I've been doing it for 40 years where there's an element of performance for me,
Right.
particularly in a keynote. Okay. In a workshop, I'd like to think I'm not really doing all that much performing. I'm mixing entertainment, motivation, inspiration, most important, information, and trying to find a nice rhythm there. But in a keynote, I just had one 2 days ago in front of a pretty large audience. There was definitely a performance element to it.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. As much as I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth right now, but as much as I say performance, if somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, nice performance," it might tweak me a little bit. And go, well, that wasn't really my. I mean, I was trying to teach as much as I could in an hour without over teaching. I mean, I'm not so sure I want to hear it played back. So if that's why I mean what I say. I almost have to think about your response
Right.
there.
And I would say that I'm okay with performative aspects and what we
Mhm.
sometimes call breaking the pattern
Right,
of, oh, I'm going to speak to you this way. Now I'm going to do this. As long as the intent is to move your point that particular way through performance.
right.
I saw a keynote. I'm not going to get specific because this guy is very popular, but basically he had a point, and then in the middle of his keynote, he brought people on stage and he played some music and he had sort of a dance off where we voted for the best dancer. And then he finished that segment. And I think he was padding to fill the hour. But I thought, what was the point of that? Like, in no way did that serve his point of creativity will lead us to success.
Yeah.
It was pure performance, and not in the purpose with the intent of helping us better understand the point. So I'm all for the multiplicity of your show video. Some people sing, some people bring out the guitar. Let's talk about storytelling. Stories are, very powerful tools, but they are not to serve themselves. They're not to entertain. they are to be an instrument through which points travel. So I would suggest, Rob, in those moments that we want to call performance, they are all with the intent of having people receive your point in a new way that might make them more engaged.
There you go. The book is Get to the Point. Simply Sharpen and Sell Your Message just came out the second edition just came out June 17th. So let's grab a copy of that. My dad used to say to his friends, this is my boy, the motivational speaker. And I would wince until the 18th time where I went, I just got to let him just do it, just say it. Because I always, I mumbled when I really am a trainer at heart. I'm teaching people, but I'm trying to be motivating at the same time. What I really want to say to people is the motivation and the entertainment part, that's the easy part.
Yeah.
Do you have a point? I mean, and to your point, I will tell you that when I'm coaching speakers myself, a lot of times, even with the stories I tell them, until I'm satisfied, I coach them into using a phrase when they're done with their story or their dance on the stage to say, and I told you that story because, okay?
100%,
Right.
Rob.
Because
And I'll tell you,
even when
yeah,
we're good at it, Joel, we're so used to telling the story, we can forget that maybe that's the audience's first time. This is not an intimate story. They may not be connecting the dots. We need to do it for them.
100%. That's how you go from riveting to relevant. And I'll tell you, Rob, I have encountered some quote unquote public speaking coaches who pushed back on me for suggesting just what you suggested.
Hmm.
I said, you see it on TED all the time. You tell the story and then you say, this story proves that. This story illustrates what happens when we. This case study is an example of the success we'll have if we. I believe that in my bones. But the pushback was, well, if you choose a good story, then that lesson will be obvious.
Hmm.
And I'm like, that's putting the onus on the audience to do something that's our job to make clear. And there's a reason that in TED Talks, they always say that after Simon Sinek, he always says, this story shows why we should do this. Or like you said, I picked this story to demonstrate. I had to double push back because it's our job to reinforce. It's our job to make sure if we show something, if we tell something, even if we perform something, that they extract what we intend for them to extract.
Yeah. Even on this past Wednesday, I brought people on stage. A little nervous telling you this story, but no, I brought people on stage for a point. But they were doing through an improv exercise, and I'm teaching them how to sell. Why are we
Mhm.
doing that? Not only did I do what you said, I had a slide that made sure I didn't miss the points I wanted to make. So here
Right.
are the four things I wanted that we just learned by watching this exercise. I've decided this is too important to even try and remember it all. I have to get this out clearly or I'm wasting people's time and they won't realize it on the spot. It takes about a day or two when they'll start thinking, what did I get out of that?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
And you know that old joke, you had one job. Well, that is our one job to make
yeah.
sure they receive our point.
Yeah. All right, let's move it to email for a minute.
Sure.
How you write about that a little bit. How do you make your point stronger in an email?
Uh, yeah, and that's really important because I would often train people to make strong points when they spoke. And then they would send me an email where their point was completely buried. And in fact, I got so much of a response to the email version of my workshop that I blew it out more in the second edition, whereas I only sort of introduced the ideas in the first edition. It really starts, and if you remember nothing else, it really starts with that subject line. Because let's think for a moment. We get to work, we start our day, we look at our inbox, and we make decisions about each one of those incoming emails. Do I read this now? Do I postpone it? Do I archive it? Do I delete it? Based solely on those 5 words. Usually, most of us don't have big previews. So if those 5 words are Wednesday, which happened to be 6 Wednesdays ago, your recipient doesn't know what to do about it. So what I recommend is always make your point clear in that subject line. I like to use a lot of all caps starters, not everything all caps, but I'll often say all caps for review, colon, client, or name the client, proposal. and then maybe put a date after that. All caps, um, uh, urgent message, or just urgent, colon, meeting date change. And if we even if we don't use those all caps, um, a breakthrough media campaign concept or documents came in from client. You see what I'm getting to?
Yeah.
My only question is, am I providing enough information for my recipient to make the right decision when they see that incoming email? Do they read it now? Do they postpone it to the archive it or they delete it? Now, once they open up the email, one of the rules that I love and that I share is this because it's so simple and so effective. No paragraph longer than 3 sentences, right? No paragraph longer than 3 sentences. I know it sounds a little hardcore, but when you do that, it's good for you, the writer, because it allows you to see the points you're making separated and compartmentalized. So you can even remove one or rearrange them based on priority. But to the recipient who never had time to think about it and must be reading it, people want to scan emails. They don't really want to read them. All of us have seen the wall of words, and it's so thick we just never get through it. And there could be something really big on the end. So I'm not saying, oh, just less is more, don't write as long. I'm saying literally no paragraph longer than 3 sentences. And believe me, Rob, I write a lot of 1 sentence paragraphs and 2 sentence paragraphs. I also believe in bullets, but let's use the right bullets. The little round circles are neutral. But if you put a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, know that you are telling your recipient one is more important than five. Or step one comes first, step two comes second, step three comes third. Don't use numbers if they're all equivalent in value. Same thing with little checks. Checks say, I have done these checklist items, or I'd like you to do these checklist items. So stick with those bullets, whether they're full or whether they're open circles, those are neutral. And I would say those are the three most important things. I also believe in a hello because we're human beings, and I believe in a follow-up. Let's say, hey, can you follow up with legal or even to yourself? I'm going to discuss this with my team and set up a meeting for next week.
Yeah, boy, we got to make a billboard out of that, of what you just talked about. I will tell you that not only am I a fan of the 3 sentence rule, but I have not clients. I have to let clients be clients. So when a client gets an email from me that says comments in red below, it means you're all over the place, and I'm getting about 100 emails a day. So I have to chop through this thing. But if it's a friend, if it's a coworker, anybody, somebody coming on the podcast, I'll immediately go back and say, not only do I want this in 3 sentences, but I don't want more than 3 paragraphs.
Yeah.
You're putting too much. I got an idea. Send me another email tomorrow, okay?
Yeah.
But don't throw the kitchen sink at me. Pretend that I am, every time I finish a podcast or finish an appointment or a workshop, I've got 40 emails waiting. And I'm looking at 7 paragraphs with 9 sentences and so yeah, world, listen to Joel, please. Let's 3 sentence rule, love it, and Rob's just adding on and have a heart, maybe 3 paragraphs or less. We
Yeah,
can
and
get it said.
your point about timing is well taken. I was the speechwriter for a CEO, and I always thought, well, when I write him an email, why don't I, include the kitchen sink? Because he's a busy guy, and here's an opportunity where I speak to him. So I'd be like, "Hey, can you review this? Also, next week we're going to do this, and in 2 weeks I'll." And he would never respond to 2 and 3, even if they were important. And I was overloading him with information. And I learned later to say, this email is about this one thing. Can you review this document? There's a deadline of next Wednesday. Rob, sometimes I tell my clients, if I say a lot of things, you'll remember none of them. If I say some things, you remember some of them. If I say one thing, you will remember all of them.
Mm.
So that doesn't mean everything has to be about one idea, but at least give and deliver one idea at a time.
Right. Yeah, even in feedback, Joel, I am a stickler when I'm working with managers, leaders, etc. Say, listen, I know you want to give feedback to that individual, whether it's watching a presentation or just watching a sales call, whatever it is. Is the intent for them actually to change and improve? How about I always go no more than two things that you thought they could do differently with a game plan. And oh, by the way, balance them out with two things that they did really well. And it's not just because you're such a swell guy, it's because a lot of times people don't know they're doing things well. They're unconsciously competent. And we want to make sure that that whatever we saw that really worked well, that those stay in place. So providing feedback, I really think we can kind of morph that rule into the same thing. If the intent is to improve performance, no, I could deal with one, by the way, but no more than two, and that's on a feedback model.
Yeah, and that's how you can always make sure that you are sharing the high priority feedback items. If you give seven
Right.
things, for sure, three of them are not going to be as important as the other four. It's just like when I see some speeches where there's a big part about the history of the organization, and then
Yeah.
there's a big part about the main idea. And when you ask people later, what do you remember? Oh, I remember that this organization is 150 years old. And you're thinking, well, that wasn't the takeaway, but you made it the takeaway because you spent so much time on it, an equivalent amount of time on that lesser important conveyance than the big takeaway.
Right. You know that rule of thumb: emphasize everything, emphasize nothing. We
Right.
really do have to pick our spots. And speaking of which, okay, I've always, I was a juggler once, so I always talk about,
Wow.
think like a juggler. As a juggler, I want to get that audience quickly, so I'm taking my second best trick and I'm leading with it. Okay, that's my hook. All right,
Right.
but I'm saving my best trick for the end. Okay,
Right.
because that's the end point, as you might say. Now you do it. Okay. Talk about how you hook audiences and how you end with a point.
So the neat thing about a point is no audience comes away thinking, you know what, Rob was great, but he made his point too many times. Because the point is the gift. It's the
Right.
piece of relevance. So the first thing I would respond with is start with it, keep showing it and providing evidence for it and supporting it and proving it throughout, and end with it. That's your strongest card. Now, it's true, you need to begin with a hook, with something interesting. But I find all too often people think, oh, it has to be explosive. It has to be really, really funny. I'm not really funny, but I got to tell a joke. That's not the right direction
Mm-mm.
because you still want to be authentic. What I find is the most powerful introduction. And there are versions of it, like you want to start with a bang. But for most people, I find a story the best way to start. Now, not just any story, but a story that introduces the challenge, the difficult thing we're dealing with, the pain point. So you could set up the steps that you're going to now propose to fix it. Now, that story doesn't have to be cinematic. I don't know if you've seen, but a lot of public speaking consultants talk about the story. Well, you have to have rising action, you have to have the hero, and then you have to do as if they're writing, Spielbergian screenplay. And I think that's, for me anyway, that's
Yeah,
way overthinking it.
I
The
agree.
story serves one goal, and that is to, in a very engaging way, introduce or illustrate the point you're about to make. The more personal the story, the more you will engage your audience. It could be something your kid told you 3 days ago. It could be something that moved you in your personal experience a week, a month, a year ago, as long as it relates. So, like I said, it's not just riveting, but it's relevant. Something I do in the beginning of my Get to the Point workshops is I bring people on stage, three people. And I say to the first two people, tell me a little bit about yourself. So I say that to the first person. Then they hem and they haw and they start with their job title and they talk about their, puppetry ability or, their days as a child. And the first two people do that. And to the third person, I say, I want you to do something different. I want you to tell me your name, your role, not just your title, but your role, and tell me something you do in your role that benefits your company. And they say, okay, my name is John Smith. I'm in charge in making sure our IT is functioning. And what that does is it makes sure we're working with efficiency so we can make the best use of our funds. And then I ask the audience who had the hardest task. And generally, it's the first two. And the reason for that is because the third person got a point. They got a roadmap for what they need to do. Now, I'm
Right.
sharing this just to show that I'm doing something that's different from pure speech making or lecture. That's interesting, that's engaging. I'm using people, I'm demonstrating. So, whether you're demonstrating through a live interaction, sometimes it's raise your hand if you, sometimes it's how many of you. But the easiest thing I've found, so you don't force that, is this story. And to
Yeah.
tell you the truth, if you tell a joke, no matter how brilliant, that is a fleeting moment of entertainment. If you tell a meaningful story, then you put people on the road to understanding your point. Now, the beauty of the end of your speech is you can what we call bookend it. So you can bring back that story and talk about maybe you saved what you learned from it or the outcome of that situation. So you bring people back to it, or you bring those three people back on stage and you show how they improved through what they learned. But you can use something exciting. I like to call it break the pattern. You could even break the pattern before you start the pattern. Do something new. Try a creative way. But the most important thing to remember is at the beginning, introduce or illustrate your point. At the end, reinforce your point because there's this research thing called primacy and recency. The study of primacy says the very first things we encounter are what we remember most. The study of recency says the things that are most recent to the end, we remember most. So we want to use those moments. They're not just like moments in the middle. They are huge moments for engagement. Let's use them with stories, with interactions that best push our point.
Well said, Joe. Really. And I got to tell you, we're gonna talk about authenticity in just a second, but um, I'll give you a fun fact. I've been speaking for over 40 years professionally. I've never started a program with a joke. I don't believe I've ever told a joke. Now, do I make audiences laugh? I'll ask them, but the rumor is yes. Uh, but never with two guys walked across the street and one guy says to the other guy, "Ooh,"
Right.
and I think it puts a lot of pressure on you anyway. That better
Absolutely.
be funny, and not only that, but better be appropriate.
Yeah. And
You're
don't bomb.
yeah, you're really kind of wandering into some unusual territory. I like a story in the beginning, if not a story, a quote, if not a quote, something that I've seen another speaker say a few minutes ago to show
Mhm.
that this is a very authentic opening
Mhm.
and try and make a point off of that. But
I love that.
key is, and we're lined up, think out the opening. There's a
Right.
lot of opinions being made. How do you make your point stronger on a slide or a
Mm.
PowerPoint slide?
There's a lot you could Google PowerPoint slides, and some
Right.
people are like PowerPoint is dead, don't use it. Some people always say PowerPoint. Some people say PowerPoints with only images of kites in the clouds, no words. So here's where I land. I'm a visual learner.
Right.
So if you have a PowerPoint, you have slides, that's only going to help me by reinforcing your point to me as a visual learner. When I see it, you tell me it, I'll get it some degree. If you reinforce it with visuals, you got me.
Hmm.
And there are visual learners in your audience. But one of my biggest rules, because I see it messed up so often, is the title of the slide. Let's not even get into the bullet points or the middle. The title. If you're not paying attention to my slides or to me, and you're just coming in, let's say you checked your email and you came right back, what are you going to use to get back in the groove of what I'm talking about? You're going to look for the title of that slide. So you should always make your point there. Uh, the lowering of interest rates will cause this. Um, Experiment X resulted in Y. 5 ways to ensure success in this endeavor. Those sound good because they always tell me, all right, this is what Joel is talking about. This sets me up to understand the middle, which will prove that. But Rob, do you know what I often see there?
Hmm.
I see history, or I see examples,
Right.
or I see background, details, evidence. 5 ways. Things that on their own would tell me nothing about that content, even though that has, it's not just a need to fill that with the right thing. It is an advantage you have as a presenter to reinforce your point there. So let's start that because I very, uh, not very often see people making points in their title slides. And it's the number one thing I talk about when I see people's slides. Now, in the middle, I believe in bullet points. I believe in not having more than you need to make your point. So that's four or five. I believe in not using complete sentences because you want people, just like with email, you want people to reference that content, not to read it. So if you have paragraphs, if you're longer than a sentence, you shouldn't even have a sentence. If you're longer than a phrase or a few words, now people are reading your words instead of paying attention to you. I do believe in visuals, but I believe in visuals not just to be pretty, but to visually reinforce what you're saying. You want to just keep it tight. Less is more, but also more is less. The more your audience needs to look at, read, and process, the less attention they'll give. And the last thing I'll say is that, and this I learned from talking to another public speaking trainer, if you have five ideas and you're tempted to create five little icons and to have bullets under each and say they're all here, you know what's going to happen? You're talking about that first icon and how this works in social media versus traditional media. They're looking at the other icons. Oh, I can't wait till he gets to traditional media, or I can't wait till he gets to AI, because they're distracted by that. It's why, when people take tests, they say to the kids, don't move ahead on this page. But if you have five slides versus one slide with everything, five slides with one thing, not only will you be able to control their attention, but you won't lose any time because you're moving in slides at the same speed where you would move to those five different aspects on one slide. So I encourage more slides if it's going to break up a lot of ideas coming at the same time.
Right, right. I'm always shocked because I think it's such a basic thing. Of course, you might disagree with me, but to me, it's very basic of how many people I've seen who have a slide. It may have passed the Joel test. Okay, it's really lets you know what the slide's about. They've hit their bullet count of, let's call it 4. Okay,
Mhm.
but for some reason they forgot how to unveil each point one at a time. In
Right.
other words, the whole slide just slaps right in front of you there. And I work a PowerPoint and slides like a weatherman works a clicker watching the weather. I don't want to bring the clouds in yet. I want to tell a story and have that map move. I want
Hmm.
that slide to move as I'm making a point. Or I fear what you said, which is, well, you're just going to read all 4 of them right now, even though I'm
Right.
really trying to get you to focus on the first one. And I don't want to make 4 slides with one bullet on each one. So, gee, I just wish more people would understand that that's why we carry a clicker and that's why we advance the bullets. I'm just
Right.
shocked at how many people sort of lost that memo somewhere.
Yeah, and people have been animating. So drop bullet 2, drop bullet 3, and you control that with the clicker for 10 or 15 years. That's not a new
No, it's
thing.
very
And
basic.
yeah, and even if you're scared of animation, you could do it old school and just do it slides. As long as everything stays the same, it's going to look like
Sure.
they appear. But yeah, the big key is however you do it, don't reveal something you're not talking about yet. There is that disconnect of when you're talking about something but showing something different is almost sabotaging your connection with your audience because they need a very clear connection between what you're saying and what you're showing. If there's information that you're not covering yet, or even worse, sometimes people are talking, I'm like, I don't even see where you are in this slide. That is very distancing and I would say cataclysmic in terms of my engaging with your slide and with you, because now my attention is trying to put two different things together.
Yeah. And I can hear it's kind of an old school may have somebody going, ah, humbug, get off my lawn. It's too distracting, all these flippity flappity. I want you to know that another rule of thumb for me is don't fall in love with all the bells and whistles. You mentioned bringing a bullet, having it fall from above or bringing it up from the bottom. I actually like just the
Sure.
dissolve feature. Just have it appear and it dissolve in front of you, appear in front of you. But a rule of thumb so that we can take care of that is whichever one you pick, that's yours. Use it. If there's a specific spot in the presentation, like for instance, sometimes I'll go through a cycle. So I want it to move like a cube. I want it
Right.
to turn. each one. So you get that sense of a cycle. All right, Rob changed moves there. But there was a reason, and then I'm getting right back to dissolving again,
Right.
so that we don't become a distraction with the bells and whistles. If we do that, we don't overdo the PowerPoint. We take the tips that you're giving us. For goodness sakes, let's not throw a PowerPoint or slides out yet. I think what people meant to say is let's just make sure we do it properly.
Right, effectively. And
Yeah,
also, one thing I've noticed is that with some slides, they change visually and they change the rules, basically, the visual rules
right,
on every slide. They sort of
right,
reinvent the slide based on what's on it. And just know that you are teaching your audience how to read your slides in the first few slides. Okay, bullets are on the left, images are on the right. There's always going to be a title there. Maybe I'll mix it up a little bit, but I'm not going to radically change colors on
right.
you or flip it because I've taught you how to receive this. So you don't need to relearn the visual language and the iconographic language of each slide at a time. I could just process the information.
Yep. All right. Got one last question for you. Coming down a home stretch, and it's an AI question.
Okay.
Look, again, for me, if I feel like retiring, I'll say I'm not going to even invest in that AI thing. But I'm not. I'm not gone yet. I'm still here. So I'm not running from it. I'm embracing it. I'm trying to learn it. I don't want to, I don't want to overuse it. I don't want to use it improperly. But one of the things that concerns me, and I'd love to hear your point on this, is that I think AI, sometimes with AI, it's so attractive in certain situations that I think it infringes on authenticity. And so, how can I not be afraid of AI, try and incorporate it, and not lose my authenticity at the same time?
Sure. And we're talking about generative AI here,
Hmm.
Gen AI, and I find it very, very helpful. I use Gemini, I use Copilot, I use Chat GPT. Sometimes I use one called Perplexity. But you're right. One of the Achilles heels of AI is authenticity. And it's not just that it's bad at authenticity. It doesn't have authenticity because it is not connected to your brain. It can only sense what you prompt it with. Now, you can throw some adjectives at it so it comes close. But ultimately, I believe that as much as we need AI to help us, AI still needs humans to make it more authentic. So, what do we do? Whenever AI has an output, don't take that as a biblical, truth and just paste that. That will always not pass the sniff test
Right.
for it not being AI. Always review it and review it, especially for authenticity. So, does this sound like me? Does this have words because it loves to be verbose? It loves often to use puffy language. It loves what's called grandiloquence, which I like to use because it shows as much as it says, which is over pretentious language. So, does it sound like me? Do the words sound like me? They don't. So I'm going to replace it with my language. Can I insert a story or an experience or an event in my life that it doesn't know that proves that it's me? These are the things that perfect, well, I shouldn't use perfect, but that make AI more authentic, more so than, oh, does it use M dashes? I've seen this all over LinkedIn. This word, this is versus that word. The only word that I know is a red flag for AI is delve. Other than that particular
Really?
word, I don't think we should base it on words. We should
Right.
base it on authenticity, accuracy, verbosity, repetition. It loves to repeat things over and over again. It's in love with adjectives, and we should not be in love with adjectives. We should be explaining something specifically, not just throwing a broad adjective at it. And priority. Once I showed something to AI and I said, please organize this for me, but I didn't tell it which element was most important of the three reasons. You know where it put the most important reason? At the end, because it didn't realize I didn't tell it that that was the most important. It will not understand our priority unless we tell it. So, but authenticity is number one. You
Right.
want to go back, you want to make sure it sounds like you, the words are like you, and there are elements in it, like stories and experience, that make it undoubtedly coming from your perspective and your background.
Right. In a sense, I look at it as almost an editor occasionally.
Yeah.
Um, where it's looking at it, it's doing some editing, but I'm going through it and I don't take all my edits. And and you're right. If we're careful, sometimes it just goes off on a tangent. It's like, did you read the book?
Yes.
But away we go. Listen, been a pleasure talking to you. Get to the point, simply sharpen and sell your message. Just recently came out in its second edition, so it's good to go on Amazon. That means it's good to go to order it. It's good to go for reviews. It's ready to roll. And congratulations, because I looked at that first edition, and you were close to 150 reviews on there at least. I forgot the number, but it was high.
Mhm.
So good on you, sir.
Thank
But listen, tell me this: how do people get a hold of you?
The best way to get a hold of me, when I moved everything to sort of LinkedIn, I'm also on X and other platforms, but LinkedIn has exploded in terms of thought leadership, ideas about presentation and communication. So I'd recommend, luckily, my name's not John Smith, it's Joel Schwartzberg. So you could look me up on LinkedIn. And the best way to get to my LinkedIn, to see my articles, to learn more about my book, is to go to www.joelschwartzberg.net. That's JoelSchwartzberg.net. Blame my parents for the long last name, but that's where you can get everything. So I consider that a storage container for all my ideas in a portfolio, not just marketing.
Well, you can thank them for one thing. It actually spells the way it sounds. Because when I first saw
Right,
your name, I kept thinking, "Oh, I'm going to butcher this up." And every time I
right.
was moving it around, I kept going, "Hey, I keep spelling it right."
Yeah,
So
it's phonetic. Yeah.
it does sort of spell the way it sounds. Listen, Joel Schwartzberg, it's been a pleasure. Nice to always have a Barrett Kohler author on the show. And I love this topic. So, just been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm really glad we had this opportunity. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Rob. It was a lot of fun. And I just enjoy the opportunity to talk to your audience and your podcast fans because they are there for a reason. And I'm glad we can work together to help them be stronger champions of their points.
Perfect. All right, so go out and get that book, everybody. You understand? Joel is a good guy. He's a Barrett Kohler author, and he said some nice things about me. All right. Well, listen, folks, we'll do it again as well as we can next time. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.